What if Avatar Fire and Ash wasn't just another sequel, but the movie that decided whether the entire Avatar franchise lived or died? Because that's exactly what almost happened. If this film failed, Avatar 4 and 5 could have been canceled. Years of footage might never be released. Entire storylines would have ended unfinished. Careers would have quietly disappeared, and James Cameron himself was ready to walk away. So what happened behind the scenes that turned Fire and Ash into a do-or-die moment? And why was the entire future of Pandora resting on one movie? James Cameron kept refusing to make the films until they could be done the way he saw them in his head. That meant inventing new cameras, new performance capture systems, and entirely new workflows. Every delay cost money, but more than that, it built pressure. By the time Fire and Ash entered full production, the franchise had been waiting for over a decade to prove it still mattered. That kind of wait doesn't build hype forever. At some point, it builds doubt. Inside the industry, people started whispering that Avatar was finished, that audiences had moved on, that no one really cared anymore. Fire and Ash was stepping into that tension, whether it wanted to or not. The film wasn't just following The Way of Water. It was answering a question Hollywood had been asking for years. Is Avatar still alive, or has it become a beautiful relic no one needs anymore? The financial stakes made that question even sharper. These movies are not small risks. They cost more than most franchises earn across multiple films. Disney didn't just greenlight sequels. They invested in a long-term machine built around Avatar tech, Avatar parks, Avatar tools, and Avatar as a pillar brand. Fire and Ash wasn't being judged on story alone. It was being judged as proof that the entire investment made sense. If it failed, it wouldn't just hurt one movie. It would freeze future projects, kill momentum, and force executives to quietly step away from a vision that took decades to build. James Cameron knew that. He has said openly that he would stop if audiences stopped showing up. That wasn't a marketing line. That was a boundary. He doesn't believe in dragging stories forward just because money is on the table. Fire and Ash became the line in the sand where the creator himself was willing to walk away if the world didn't care enough to follow. That puts a strange weight on a film. Every frame becomes a question. Is this worth continuing? Is this still earning its place? The pressure didn't stop with Cameron. The cast carried it too. Several actors filmed scenes years ago for movies that may not come out until far in the future, if they come out at all. Some of the younger actors had to shoot future scenes early, so aging wouldn't break the timeline. They performed emotional moments without knowing if the audience would ever see them. That uncertainty changes how a set feels. You're not just acting for a release date, you're acting on faith. The crew felt it as well. Hundreds of artists, designers, animators, and engineers poured years of their lives into building systems that only exist for Avatar. For many of them, this wasn't just another job. Their skills, their careers, their pride became tied to whether Fire and Ash succeed. If the film collapsed, it wouldn't just mean layoffs. It would mean years of work quietly erased, talked about as a failed experiment instead of a breakthrough. That kind of pressure doesn't show up in trailers, but it lives behind every decision. The technology itself nearly became the franchise's downfall. Underwater performance capture was one of the most difficult challenges modern filmmaking has faced. Actors had to perform scenes while holding their breath, communicating emotions through movement instead of dialogue, while cameras tracked every detail. Mistakes were expensive. Entire sequences had to be rebuilt when early tests failed. At times, the innovation that made Avatar special also threatened to slow it into the ground. Every time the tech stumbled, the question came back louder. Is this worth it? Could a simpler approach save the franchise? Cameron refused to compromise, even when it would have been safer. That stubbornness is part of why Avatar exists at all, but it's also why Fire and Ash carried so much risk. Hollywood didn't believe in it the way it once did. For years, commentators said Avatar had no cultural impact, that people remembered the visuals but not the characters, that the franchise didn't live in daily conversation. Fire and Ash had to fight against that narrative. It wasn't enough to look good, it had to remind people why Pandora mattered emotionally. That's why the film also marks a structural turning point. Fire and Ash ends the first major saga. Everything after it becomes stranger, darker, and more experimental. The future films are not safer versions, they are bigger swings. That means Fire and Ash is the gatekeeper. If it succeeds, the full vision continues. If it doesn't, the story may end quietly, unfinished, with threads left hanging forever. There's a painful irony in that. Cameron built a world so detailed and massive that keeping it alive requires constant success. Each expansion raises the cost of failure. Avatar is both protected by its scale and threatened by it. Fire and Ash reflects that tension even in its name. Fire destroys. Ash is what remains. But ash is also where new growth begins. The franchise itself stood in that space while this film was being made, burned by years of waiting, covered in doubt, but still holding the chance to rise again. When people watch Fire and Ash, they won't see the spreadsheets, the anxiety, the late nights, and the meetings where futures were debated behind closed doors. They'll see a story. But behind that story is a simple truth. This movie wasn't made casually. It was made with the understanding that it might decide whether an entire universe lives or dies. That knowledge doesn't always make a film better, but it makes it heavier. Fire and Ash carries more than plot. It carries time, risk, and the quiet fear of what happens if the world finally looks away.